Welcome to Laying the Leadership Foundation podcast, where Stephanie and I discuss how we are building a leadership development program and hear from guests on their experiences.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Laying the Leadership Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Poole.
I'm Stephanie Jurasic.
And this week we will be talking and giving you guys an update on our formation group. We know it's been almost 2 months since we've let you know what's going on with everything going on there. But Stephanie, I guess, can you fill us in a little bit about what's happened in our past few meetings?
Sure. So we've really focused on that needs-based assessment with our formation group, making sure we finalized the questions that we wanted to ask, the wording, the order in which the questions are asked, and we then solidified how we were going to distribute the needs-based assessments with our formation group. And then this past one, we introduced our logic, or the concept of a logic model, so that we can then work on that once we get the results of the needs-based assessment.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, the needs-based assessment, also shout out to Jen Cunningham and Nick Saylor of Providence a couple episodes ago. They sent us their logic model PowerPoint that they shared with our group. So that was a huge help as we pretty much stole that. So shout out to you guys for creating such a great document for us to use with our program. So, but I guess talking about the logic model a little bit, I think that started to get some of our formation group members, their minds rolling, and I don't know we didn't go into anywhere near as deep as Sunny did in our NCAA law module back. I think it was module 1, meeting 4, or
yes,
maybe it was
I believe so. Either 3 or 4.
Yeah, somewhere in that module. We didn't go anywhere near to depth, but we hit those I guess discussion points, some hierarchy things, some more broad. But how do you think that was received by our members?
I think it was received really well. We had a few that even voiced that it makes a lot of sense to them, and that this was a really good way to organize our thoughts, our plans, and really set that pathway towards what we're building. So I think our formation group received it really well. I think it'll be another thing to see how everyone does once we sit down and really do the nitty-gritty work of making that logic model.
Yeah, and going off that, I think one of the things I'm interested to see is also, like you said, once we get that data back from our needs-based assessment, how that goes. But I'm also curious to see how some of our coaches might also start to implement a little bit of the logic model, at least concepts, into what they do on the practice field as well, and in games, because I think it's not only a tool that you can use in classroom or for building any program, but also for practices, for teaching concepts, all these different things. So I'm curious to see how that happens. Now, one of the things that our formation group does is we meet every other week, which I think some weeks, obviously, it's a little bit shorter than others. Some weeks it's the full 45 minutes to an hour. I guess, what are your thoughts on us having that meeting as frequently as we do? And do you think that that should be a standard for anyone who's starting to create a formation group?
Like you said, some meetings are shorter than others. We might not have too much to talk about. Like for example, our last formation group was literally just me asking, how do you want to distribute the needs-based assessment to the coaches? Do we want to go individually, coach by or team by team, talk to each of the coaching teams first and get a more in-depth feedback from those coaches, or do we just want to go into like a staff meeting or the coaches meeting where we can get them all in the same place, give them the same description and explanation of what we're trying to do, and then hand out the needs-based assessment that way? So that meeting was maybe 10 minutes with them just saying, no, the meeting's good, and that was it. I think it's still good to have these meetings every other week so that we still touch base. We don't lose focus from the Leadership Academy and what we're trying to build. I think if we did once a month or maybe even once every 3 weeks, we could start to forget what we talked about the last time, forget what we wanted to talk about the next time. So I think having these consistent every other week times to at least touch base is good, so that it's still pretty much on the forefront of everyone's minds. It doesn't go too long without a meeting. So it's still prevalent for everyone. How about you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, especially with everything going on in the COVID world. I know that with my schedule, I have so much going on that it's nice to have that refresher every other week. And I think really the thing that I find the most exciting about it is even if we don't have a long meeting, it's that 5 to 10 minutes of banter before the meeting starts to where we start to build those relationships. And ultimately, we know that that's what all this is about. It's about the relationships and building those. So I think that if we can get our formation group to have that strong foundation of a relationship with each other, I think that only help us long term. So even if, like you said, our meetings go 5 to 10 minutes some weeks, I think that bantering, just checking in on each other, I think that goes so much farther than anything else that we might ever talk about in some of those meetings. But I think that's just another important part. At the same time, I don't think that meeting every other week or however, I think that's all just dependent on your program. What works for us might not work for Jen and Nick at Providence because they have a much bigger team. They have different things going on, so that might be a weekly meeting for them. For other institutions, it might be a monthly. It just depends on your institution or where you're working and the people and their schedules. So I think there's just so much to take into account, but I think the 2 weeks really works well for us.
Yeah, and another point for me at least, these meetings really hold me accountable to really keep working at this leadership academy. Because like you said, with these crazy COVID times, we have um, our sports are up and running again. So we have students at practices, we have games, we have I know midterms will be coming up soon on my end, and the week 5 reports were just sent out a few like 2 weeks ago. So dealing with that, like that can all pile on and kind of get this pushed to the back burner without me really meaning to. So these meetings every other week really help me to stay accountable and stay on top of building this so that we're not just stagnant for a while and then trying to rush at it in the summertime.
Yeah, and I completely agree. So I think it's been fantastic for us and something I'm excited for moving forward. And I mean, holding us accountable. I mean, there's so many times to where it's easy just to say, you know what, that's not until next week, and I'll worry about it then. But I know you and I meet weekly, but at the same time, it's the extra work that we need to put in that time that we talked about in our formation group meeting today. It's the time, it's the everything else outside of the actual time that we're meeting that really will push this into become the program that it will be. So um, I have I'm really excited to see where all this goes, especially with once we get our needs-based assessment back, and for us just to dive into that data, because obviously how you and I might interpret that might be completely different than how our coaches interpret it, than how our student athletes, and so that's one of the things I'm most excited for with the formation group.
Yes, I'm very excited to get that data back and really dig in. And I've never been the person to like research and data. So this is whole new realm for me, but I am very excited to see what our coaches and student athletes think and start building it out. And I'm actually getting excited to do the logic model, which after that session with Sunny, my mind was spinning and I could not process it. But when we went through it during our meeting today, I was like, oh, this is simple. This is pretty straightforward. Why was my mind spinning so much? But um, I don't know. I guess it was just that information overload when I've had time to marinate with it. And we've learned so much more since then in the law program. So I'm actually excited to get this logic model going because I feel like that's just another step forward towards what we want to build.
Yeah, and see, I'm the complete opposite. I love the data. That's how I look at all my stuff. So, being in external communications, in charge of website, in charge of social media, all these different things, I'm constantly looking at the data. Okay, well, what's hitting home? What's doing well? What's not? And readjusting our strategy from there. So, I think that's another way that you and I balance each other out very well is what one person's strength is for one, the other might have that weakness and vice versa. So I think that it's a really good thing that we're paired together for this and just help each other with our weakness, with the other weaknesses, but also pull those strengths out into play as well. But I think the logic model, like you said, I was completely with you with that overload. But I think the big thing with that was we had already learned so much earlier in that section. I mean, the 2 hours beforehand, that last hour to 45 minutes, whatever it was just like something else that was just hitting us during the face that we weren't completely understanding. But I do think that marinating it and having that time to go through it and think about it definitely makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. And Tom, if law has taught us anything about each other, it is that we are completely different people, but we complement each other well. And we, like you said, we pick up the slack where someone's weaknesses might be, and we shine with our strengths. So that's been really interesting to me to really uncover and find out about each other as we're going through this, because it seems like we do have a lot of similarities, like with our vision for this and what we want, but the way that we go about getting there is completely different. And I think it's great to see that and figure that out.
Well, and I think that just points to what leadership is. What it comes down to it is there's no one set path to get to where you need to go or where you're trying to go. What the path that you take might be completely different than mine, but if we ended up in the same spot, then that's what matters. And then we can share stories, we can tell the stories about our journey. I mean, how many times have we ever heard it's not about the end point, it's about the journey getting there? And that's what it's really about. And it doesn't matter how we get there, it's just a matter of us getting there and helping each other out in whatever ways we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is definitely showing that.
Yep, no doubt. Well, anything else you can think of before we wrap up?
No, I think that's a pretty good update for where we are right now.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us this week on Laying the Leadership Foundation podcast. Signing off, I'm Thomas Poole.
And I'm Stephanie Jurasic.
And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us this week on Laying the Leadership Foundation podcast. Be sure to subscribe and review this podcast wherever you listen. If you found value in this podcast, do us a favor and share this episode with someone else. As always, keep laying the foundation.